really this kind of scenario where thinking about provisioning users in Office 365 or in Azure AD and giving them access to on-premises estate or on-premises SharePoint sites or on-premises resources. And the key thing, I guess, is really how the hell do we do that? Because I know when I was thinking about doing this, I was like, that just doesn't going to work. How am I going to get on-premises I'm going to get cloud users with no identity at all on premises and log them into an on-premises SharePoint site? How's that going to happen? Well, the interesting thing is you can make it work. There's a number of scenarios for doing it. The key one I'm hopefully going to demonstrate for you in a few minutes. But first, just for recap, was everybody in the session previously, apart from you guys at the back? No? So I'll go through this relatively quickly. So in terms of Azure AD, the things we're thinking about in terms of scenarios for the previous session, we were talking about having a kind of a cyclic experience of users coming out of Active Directory on premises, moving into Azure AD with directory synchronized accounts, looking at cloud-based, cloud-created accounts is where we're going next as we come around. So we want to get this scenario where our users can start to log in different places using the same usernames and passwords. So from an Azure AD perspective, and what is it? Kirk Evans' session this morning got a lot of detail on why Azure AD is important and why you need to learn it. It is the kind of, the story of the future, if you like, in terms of identity and regarding Microsoft technologies. It's me.
Me.
You, over here.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So what Neil just mentioned is Azure AD. So there is always a question comes up as to why Azure AD. Well, we wanted some Active Directory source which could authenticate 500,000 user requests at the same time, have that many kind of user accounts, and be able to provision the things from online as well, or on-prem as well. So what we're going to now look into is what is it required to integrate Azure AD and on-prem. Okay, so when we say that, a couple of things still exist. Let's take a step back and look at our organization, which we kind of have shown the directory synchronization, right? We said we have an organization which is azure.spocloud.com, which is an on-premises Active Directory. We synchronized Bob Fox from, who is the new CEO who joined in the company, to online. And after that, the requirement was to see how do we give Bob Fox a single sign-on experience. So he no more complains that I have to sign in multiple times and he just logs in seamlessly. Okay, so now, and after that, Neil showed that Bob decided to hire new employees and he just scripted the hiring, the user creation process, right? And automated the licensing process. Once that is done, this organization decides to invest in Azure IaaS, okay, which means they decided to move their on-prem SharePoint and a couple of other workloads to Azure Infrastructure as a Service. But the IT admin, and the company, that said, why do I need to create users when Microsoft claims that Azure AD is the same across all workloads? Which means when we talk about Azure AD isn't two different identities when it comes to Office 365 or when it comes to IaaS, or for the matter of fact, if you have other Azure workloads too, which means Intune or any of the other workloads. So with that request which came in, what we need to now look into is, if your organization today is on Office 365 and tomorrow you decide to go ahead and get into IaaS, do you need to have separate set of users? Well, the answer is no. You can still manage it and you can still have the same synchronization process which we spoke about, and you will be able to go ahead and use the user across both of these workloads. So how do we do it? Pretty simple. We'll go ahead and do a demo also for this one. You can link the Office 365 and Azure AD subscriptions. You could be able to actually go ahead and add an ADFS or a single sign-on provider. So what Neil mentioned some time back, if Bob decides to go ahead and have a couple of employees in Azure AD and be able to leverage those users to sign into on-prem, we could still do that. Okay? Now, how do we do this? Neil is going to show you a demo, but we are going to configure a ADFS as the identity provider. We're going to create a relying party with SharePoint. We're going to actually go ahead and create a trusted token issuer, which would be my Azure AD. And once we do that, we're going to go ahead and assign user permissions. So the first step is when we actually go back and see these two ADs, okay, how do we link them? How is it that when I create one account in on-premises Active Directory, and when I do a dirsync, can I see it in Azure in IaaS, and can I see it in Office 365 too? So let's go ahead and take a look at a quick demo.
This is where things can go really wrong, right?
You're scaring me, Neil.
This is where all your accounts get deleted.
Yeah, okay. I didn't realize we're still demoing the PPT. Give me a minute. Let me minimize this. No? Okay, there is my friend back. And so here, right now, if I have
Manas.
Yeah.
You're not extended.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So what we showed in the previous demo was we actually have a directory synchronization tool which is running, which could be Azure AD Sync or dirsync, and they are synchronizing the users. Okay, so right now this organization is going to go ahead and get IaaS, which is my subscription here. Going back to Active Directory. Okay, so when we log into manage.windowsazure.com. Okay, these are where the organizations, all of the virtual machine and all of the other workloads which has been provisioned. What we do is, within it, if you go to your Active Directory, okay, which proves that what we were talking about, it's that one common Active Directory behind all of those workloads, you would see by default, there will be a default directory, which is already there. What needs to be done, in interest of time, we have gone ahead and added it. You need to click on New, and provide the Office 365 domain that your organization owns. How do you check it? There is way through, you do it through PowerShell. But if you log into your Office 365 Admin Center, and if you click on Domains, okay, here is where your domains show up. Azure.spocloud.com and Azure.spocloud.onmicrosoft.com. So we see two domains out here. When you subscribe to any of the Office 365 tenants, it comes with a default domain, which is the default domain which you see with an onmicrosoft.com suffix. onmicrosoft.com suffix. And then the other one is your on-premises environment, which you just go ahead and add. Now, what you need to do is, in order to bring this unified experience, you need to click on New and add the other directory which is there for your organization. Okay, so once you are done with this, that's like click on New, provide the name. It would say sign out and sign in back with the same global admin account. Once this is done, that's pretty much it. Okay, you would be able to go back and click on users, and here are all my users, which, remember Neil scripted those users some time back. Here are all my users which we actually go back and be able to manage from within my Office 365 subscription. And remember, Office 365 is already integrated with your on-premises AD via dirsync, which means your user actually resides on-prem, but now we are seeing it out here in, in this Azure subscription itself. Later on, what we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and create a user here, okay, in Office 365, which should be able to go ahead and sign in back, but I'm going to show that when we do the two-factor or phone factor authentication later. So Neil is going to do the next part of this. Give me a minute while I bring back the PPT.
So the interesting thing with the linking scenario is when you link your Office 365 directory to the Azure AD, you do have to go through a validation process, right? It's not simply as forward as just going click, add, done. You have to go in and do the proving, a bit like when you add a domain to Office 365, you have to go and register a text record in your on-premises, in your domain DNS. you have to go through the same process here. Is there a question?
When it's going to be possible the opposite direction, at your Active Directory, Azure ID to Office 365?
Can you add your Azure Active Directory to Office 365? So in the terms of the sync, you're kind of doing that anyway. But if you're thinking separated Active Directory, so I don't know if that's possible.
So when you say separate active, so see, Azure AD is one, right? What we are trying to go out and...
Like Office 365, that's out of the box. Can we add another one?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yes, you can.
We did that actually in the first part of the demo today. So we took the on-prem Active Directory and we have added that as something azure.spocloud.com, and we went ahead and showed a single sign-on experience for that. So you will be able to link your on-prem Active Directory too, and that's the entire flow.
What you can't do is manage your on-prem Active Directory from Office 365 or from Azure AD. That's something you can't do today in that UI. Okay, so that's your one way. If that's the question you're asking, that's the kind of the one-way experience. So, in terms of what Manas would have done here, we like I said, he went through it very quickly because it's a process you have to go through and validate the DNS, and it takes time. So essentially all you do is he would have added his domain as a custom domain to Azure AD, and then the following procedure is literally to add co-admins. So anything else you want to add, any people you want to add to help administer that domain, you add them in there. And as you link these domains together, you'll find that your existing co-admins will get ripped out. Okay, from the Azure AD domain, because you're basically overriding it with the new connection, and then you can go and add them back. You can go and add additional domain administrators back, but you have to kind of manage that experience. So what you'll see when you go through the process is you'll see this big pop-up that says you're about to remove all your admins. So just be careful of that and be wary of what that's actually intending to do.
During that process where you've removed them, what happens? Can you still access?
So the question is, during the process of removal, once they get removed, at the moment of joining the domains, the original admins, apart from the admin of the domain you're adding the users to, they get removed, right? The co-admins get removed. The global admin remains. So you're not removing your ability to administer the domain. You're just restricting who can. Yeah. So if they're halfway through doing something, you're going to have a problem, right? So just plan this approach. Yeah. Okay, so the next thing really is to think about what we do with our Azure AD domain and on-premises. So I mentioned earlier on that we want to now start thinking about those cloud users that we've created, or the cloud users, or the users from the domain that Manas has got, and linking them back to on-premises, linking them back to on-premises infrastructure that doesn't have those accounts in its own local Active Directory. Now, we have a problem here because Manas's license doesn't allow him to do this in his scenario. So I've got to fudge this a little bit, but I've done the same thing on the Microsoft tenancy, which allows me to do it. So I'm going to show you, you'll see a subtly different URL, but I can promise you it's the same scenario, right? It does work. So I'm going to walk you through a demo and see how this is actually all done. If I can get my machine on.
Yeah. Oops, static.
So if we think about the things that Manas was saying he had to do to begin with, we talked about adding the on-premises Active Directory and publishing it in the Windows Azure Active Directory. So if I go in here and I look at my directory, so like I say, this is a replication of what Manas already has. What we'll see in here, I have its Evolution Conference. I can go into that directory. I can look at my published applications, and I see my ADFS application in here. This is the ADFS application that exists in my on-premises infrastructure. So I'm basically saying I want to use the ADFS app as a published trusted application for my Azure AD. So I can call on it and consume from it. The next thing we need to do is go through the process of configuring that Active Directory to accept requests coming in from Office 365. So if I go and look at the SharePoint server itself, at the ADFS server, sorry, you see we do two things. We create this relying party trust here for SharePoint. I'm not going to go into the details, it takes time to do this, but it's all published on Steve Peshka's blog. And fundamentally what I'm doing is I'm provisioning the endpoint for my on-premises infrastructure to have a relying party, or to be part of a relying party trust with ADFS, with Azure ADFS. The other thing I need to do is I need to configure a claims provider trust, again, it does say Nelimo info. I'm basically saying similar things in here, and I'm providing the endpoint for my URL. I can quickly test that. And if we look in here, we'll see the same information. I apologize, it's a bit small. But down here, the nelimo.info is my on-premises domain. So I'm basically saying, get me the federation metadata from the on-premises domain, and I can then use it to configure my trust. Once you go through that process, it's very straightforward. The next thing I need to do is take my ADFS on-premises certificate and add it to my SharePoint site, so it knows it's going to trust information, trust requests that are generated, or tokens that are generated by the on-premises ADFS. Then it's a case of going into SharePoint. SharePoint. And in SharePoint, let me just make this a little bit bigger. I do a few things. So I grab my certificate. This is my token signing certificate from ADFS, which is found here. So this is the certificate. Resolution. This is my token signing cert that I just export and bring it to SharePoint and install it in the trusted root certificate for the local computer. I then create a new claim type mapping. So in this case, what I'm saying is I want to map the user name to the email address. So as they log in, I want them to be that kind of mapping to go on, so that I'm seeing one thing and I'm mapping it to something else. The realm is something that we use to identify which particular trust inside ADFS we're going to consume from. So when the realm is passed, as the user logs in, the realm is passed back to ADFS. ADFS uses this relationship, if I can show it you, down here. This is the realm that's configured, and it basically tells ADFS which particular configuration it needs to use to authenticate that user. Obviously, ADFS, you can use it for multiple things. Once I've done that, back to SharePoint, and I create a trusted identity token issuer. So at this point, what I'm saying is the URL of my on-premises ADFS, I shouldn't have done that, the URL of my on-premises ADFS is going to be used as a redirect point for users logging in to SharePoint Online. So I'm going to create to SharePoint on-premises. So I create a trusted identity token issuer. I then can use that trusted identity token issuer to configure a SharePoint web application to use that as the authentication mechanism instead of using Windows NT or NTLM, for example. So if I go into SharePoint now, I've done all this. It takes, I don't trust myself to break my demo, so let's go and see what it looks like. If I go into SharePoint on premises, in here somewhere. Sorry, I thought I had this loaded. If I go to the web app, hopefully it should come nice and quick. So manage web applications. This is my SharePoint.nilmo.info, which is the URL we're trying to protect. If I click on this guy, look at the authentication providers, and check this out. Down here, NTLM, no Windows authentication enabled. We're purely looking at this SAML provider 2. So we're purely looking at the ADFS configuration that we just made, which is going to consume user accounts from Windows Azure AD, that's where the federated metadata is coming from, into on-premises and authenticate a cloud-only user into SharePoint on-premises so they can operate and do work. So it brings that circle back round again to that, brings those contractors into our on-premises experience. Hopefully. So that's all done, that's all configured. Now what I should be able to do, if I do a new browser session, is go to my SharePoint.nelmo.info. I've got so many cookies now that anything could go wrong here.
Yeah.
No.
Different browser.
Tell you what, let's try this.
Yeah. I think that's it.
So I hit the endpoint of my ADFS. My SharePoint site is basically saying I'm configured to allow this connection, these identity providers. This is the one we just built, nelimo.info. And it wants to log me in. So I'm choosing now, you can see it's redirected to ADFS. SharePoint Online knows where I want to go, so it's using the SharePoint Online service. and it wants to be to provide an ID for my on-premises user, my cloud-only user, sorry. .info, right?
Yeah.
At this point, I can't type with the microphone in my hand.
You want to take this? I think it's good.
I can sign in. Now notice, unlike this traditional ADFS scenario, we're going to sign in the first time. At that point onwards, I will continue to sign in. So I'm now signed in my on-premises SharePoint site with Bob Fox, his account. So that's how we can leverage that end user account in online, cloud-only user and online into our on-premises situation. And I don't think Bob's an admin. Maybe he is. If he was, I think he is. I should be able to go in here and start looking at other users, if I have any. Let's have a look. Who do I have? So if I go to my ADFS on premises again, look at my users. Okay, I have a Neil Hodgkinson in here. I have an SP admin. Let's see if we can provision one of those, see what it finds. So it's found my SP admin account. So I can now just work with that directory in online exactly as I could with the Office, with the SharePoint on-premises Active Directory.
You don't have to register anything to picker or anything.
Sorry, Matt, say again?
You don't have to make any other references for the people picker.
So you've got to be careful. You might have to do some other things. The people picker there is working just fine. There's some scenarios, such as if I was to log onto my user profile here and try and add a new profile picture, I'd need to be careful how those internal URLs are mapped up. So I'd have to make sure that all of the possible URLs that I could connect to online that might be different are all published out. So if we look at how we publish this, if I look at my WAP server, I have my SharePoint site published out, I have my ADFS site published out, but if I'm trying to navigate to like a service application endpoint and those kind of things, or to a My Site host, for example, it may be on a different URL. In this particular example, my My Site host, it actually is not provisioned, so it's not going to work anyway, but if my My Site host was a different web application with a different URL, I'd need to make sure I'd mapped all that up as well, and provided the same credential mappings on that web application. But other than that, nothing else new to do. All works fine.
Okay. This one you press.
Yeah, just hold it in.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Yeah. Thank you. So what we just looked at, trying to kind of go ahead and do our quick recap is, we looked at the user who was provisioned on-prem. We synchronized it with any of the directory synchronization tools. It made it to Azure AD. And once the user is in Azure AD, we linked an Azure AD subscription to a IaaS subscription which the company owns. And then if the company tomorrow decides to have all of the vendor users provisioned in Azure AD, so we provisioned the vendor users in Azure AD using PowerShell. And then the final one was when we gave privilege to those vendor users to a SharePoint site in on-prem, which means we are actually going ahead and at a stage where both of the users could be living in two different directories, but they are able to access the resource across workloads. So now that the users are in Azure AD, okay, what additional things can we go ahead and look into? So when we say that the company may be migrating workloads to IaaS, on-premises AD users requires access to anything which is in IaaS. If I say that, okay, I have a couple of users I want to manage, but then the company decides to host a Azure web app in Azure, okay? Of course, everyone, I'm going to say, when we say Azure web app, a website in Azure, as the name now states, web apps, can they access those resources? So let's look into it. So contractors would also, now the requirement is the Azure AD users should also be able to access the Azure web apps or the Azure websites which we have. How do we do it? We, of course, have looked into how do you connect the on-premises Active Directory to IaaS. We have to actually go back and look into a couple of additional things, which Neil is shortly going to go ahead and show a demo on, which is Site-to-Site Vpn, which means even though I am in IaaS, I can have a virtual machine which authenticates against a directory source which is in my on-prem. Or if I create a user in on-premises, I should be able to go back and have that user authenticate back in a IaaS subscription. So you could, of course, use ExpressRoute. We have spoken about ExpressRoute in the previous session as well, just given and you guys might have looked into that as well. Or we could actually go out and have a virtual network and create a site-to-site VPN. So for this, what we did is I have a subscription which is representing company 1, okay? And Neil has a subscription which is kind of going ahead and representing a different Azure subscription which exists. So think of it being two different, they have their own IP addresses, they have their own virtual machines, own AD and all that. What we're going to do right now is create a site-to-site VPN, okay, so that users across this can communicate. Okay, how do you do it? You could actually go ahead and do any of this. You could use a remote access server for on-premises. If your requirement is from IaaS, you want to communicate to on-prem. You could actually go back and deploy a VNet gateway, or configure a site-to-site VPN, or extend the on-premises Active Directory to infrastructure as a service and have that as one of the Active Directories there. So this is the scenario which we are going to go ahead and show you today, which means that Active Directory, azure.spocloud.com, which is in an on-premises somewhere in a virtual machine. We have an extended directory of it in IaaS subscription. And what's the end result or the end goal? You have anything, any workload in Azure, which is SharePoint Farm, File Share, Azure Web Apps, anything, you should be able to still use the same set of users which you have created and be able to authenticate and authorize using them. So let's look at a quick demo. And
okay, so this is a similar scenario. We've got two distinct environments. This time we're not depending on cloud services as such in terms of Azure AD. Obviously we could provision our users still with Azure AD in the same way we did in the last demo. In this case, we're more thinking about, what if I've got line of business applications and I want to just extend them out or push my Active Directory out into Azure instead. So I want to think about connecting directories together. Believe it or not, these two machines here are separated by a significant distance in terms of latency. We're in two different subscriptions. I'm not sure where Manas's subscription is, but if we just look at the machine, it's slow. So we've got machines published out in the 192.168 address range, and then we've got machines published out in the 10.0.0 address range. And these are two distinct separate directories located in two distinct separate subscriptions in Azure. What I need to do is effectively build a connection between the two of them. So we do this with something called a VNet gateway. In this case, because they're both in Azure, it's actually quite easy to do. You basically specify which domain is going to be the local domain that you're going to connect to, which domain is the remote domain, which is where the gateway is going to exist. So the gateway is already provisioned. It takes about 30 minutes to provision a gateway, so I'm not going to do it live. But you can see here what we have between my SharePoint VNet and the Manas VNet over here, which is in the other subscription. We have this VPN gateway. It's a very, very simple process to configure. This is done all in software here using the Azure gateway machines, which are actually effectively Azure-based VMs. If you're doing it with an on-premises VPN gateway scenario, you can do things like download the VPN device script for specific VPN devices on premises, and it'll do all the configuration for you and connect it all up. But it does take a little while. It's fairly robust. From an Azure perspective, if you're practicing playing around with this stuff, don't leave it connected, because it's relatively expensive to leave a VPN gateway connected. So in this case, what we have is these two scenarios, or two environments linked together. So I have a domain controller here, and I have a domain controller here. Just to prove the point, no, I'm not going to replicate an account, it'll probably take a while, but if we go and look at the users over on this machine over here, you'll see that from a directory replication perspective, we have all the same users down here. We should have, did you create Bob Fox in this environment?
Yeah. If you just refresh it, I think once.
Bob's been deleted.
Yeah, looks like.
So I don't know what domain Manas created Bob Fox in, but it's not this one.
Same one. I think directly. Just refresh that console once again.
No, he's not here. Anyway, I'm going to go and create a new user.
Just create a new user.
So this environment here is on effectively the other side of the world. So I'll just create a Bob Foxy Fox, since that's what his password, his name says. And we'll just call him bfoxy. We don't break anything. So this is no different to extending any on-premises network across multiple estates. Once the VPN gateway is in, it's all done. So there's our Bob down here. His account, logon details, bfoxy at azure.spocloud.com. And I can go to my SharePoint site over here, which is just a regular SharePoint IaaS machine. And I should be able to provision Bob in here, hopefully. Oh, I'm already there. Hopefully it finds him. There we go. There's Bob Foxy Fox. You just saw me create him.
Yeah, the other account.
And there's Bob. So he's provisioned now. I could just go and log into him. And that account was just created in whatever Manas's IaaS subscription is. So again, it's not really new technology, but it's just demonstrating the fact that we can extend our reach for this capability across multiple subscriptions and across multiple cloud services.
Yeah. Thank you, Neil. So what we just saw is, something which is important out here is we build this VPN capability between two Azure subscriptions. It's easy to kind of go ahead and have a dedicated device in between, another virtual machine, and kind of go ahead and connect back to your on-prem environment, right? And then it just continues to be that seamless integration. So let's take a quick look at, before we do the rest of this, let's take a quick look at what we just did on this one. We went ahead and said that Active Directory users on premises, we have synchronized it, we have given a single sign-on experience, we have integrated the Azure AD with, with an IaaS subscription, and we have gone back and did a site-to-site VPN with the extending Azure AD per se. Okay. Does the story end there? Well, no. The company can tomorrow decide saying, my public website for my organization, I'm going to host it in IaaS. Okay. How do I give access to people who already exist today? If I come back and say, oh, well, that doesn't work, which means you need to think of a different directory source. Well, the answer is not that. Whatever you do in Azure, be it a SQL database, be it any of the Azure website, you will be able to leverage the same account, which is exactly what we are going to show. So company creates this, was there a question, sorry? Okay. So company creates corporate portals. Yeah, it's like, sorry. And then web designers, they wanted that their FTEs or full-time employees, they need access to update the portal on a regular basis. And of course, other users need read-only access. So you have all of those access levels already pre-populated once you have this set up. So what do we need to do? We need to actually go back and, of course, have a company portal created in Azure website or other Azure web app. You need to be able to go ahead and publish the content within it. You need to configure user roles and permissions, and that's typically all that is required for the user to ensure that he is successfully going to authenticate against the same Azure AD. And we have by now seen that the user can reside anywhere, on-prem or online. So let's look at a quick demo around how this scenario is. No, one more. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure, you minute too. Once. So what I did is, We're not seeing it? Okay. My bad. Where is this? Let me minimize this one. That is very strange. Being disturbed, guys. I don't know why it is going from the. Okay, so coming back here, we have our Azure. Okay.
Told you we forgot to create a pesca.
Okay, we took the last name correctly, which is Bob, so. Okay, so right now, what we see here is the company logs in. Interest of time, we have created a website, but it's pretty simple, new, and then, Azure website, web app, and you say quick create, and then you can leverage any of the out-of-box tools to kind of change it. So once you do this, it just states, it asks for two information from you saying what is the name of the Azure website and which region do you want to go ahead and provision along with this URL, which is like, we named it random web. So randomweb.azurewebsites.net. And then after that, what is important out here is, would you be able to authenticate for the users, right? So if you click on that, okay, here is where you should be able to go ahead and look into any of the configuration switches further. You can use the couple of customization tools in order to go ahead and configure this part of it. And if you click on configure, there is where it asks you for all of the configuration, starting off from who has access, who you do not want to, what level of access, and all those. So if I okay, just one other thing which I wanted to show you guys, sorry. Yeah. So default documents, this is which are the pages which are there as a part of the website which you have been going ahead and providing. And then I think I scrolled up too first on here. So here is where you are actually providing where is your Azure Active Directory location. And which is this location? The same location which I showed you guys some time back, which is my mbazure.spocloud.com. If I go here are my users which I'm able to go back and authenticate for this website. All the users which we just showed you some time back. What's the sign-in experience? This is my random web. That's a wrong bookmark. My simple Azure website, and it just goes ahead and shows you, though that's not what we are going to go ahead and do right now. We have a little bit to discuss more. But yes, it just goes ahead and it's a plain HTML page or whatever you want to go ahead and configure as a site. It just authenticates with the existing user. So I know that that's what is the truth, but
Week to design that page.
yes. I was getting up in the middle of the night and trying to choose what colors should I put there, but then I eventually tested it. My laptop, I know what the place where it should go to after this demo, but trying one more time to okay, so now that we are actually give me a minute here. Okay. Yeah. So that's what we just showed you guys, saying how does the user kind of seamlessly can be present at any of the locations. Okay. However, when we talk about any of these users, what is the most important factor is, I don't know if you guys noticed a change. We wanted to show you this with an animation, okay, but I just, as I said, The laptop broke it. It's so safe to say that. The animation typically. We wanted to kind of look into security in all of those things, right? We spoke about how secure it is when you have an ADFS server on-prem, because nobody can talk to your on-prem Active Directory, right? And on top of it, like what I gave you an example, if Bob decides to travel to multiple locations, he can still leverage his phone, which to kind of go ahead and use as his authentication device. And what we are going to now demo is how can you leverage your phone, which for a user, which is sitting back in your on-premises Active Directory, and ensure that every time he tries to sign in, you do a two-factor authentication or a multi-factor authentication and ensure that Bob sees that user logging in. So before the demo, here is quickly what we need to do. Company wants to implement enhanced security, and that the requirement is protection for Office 365 websites and implemented MFA. What do they do? There are multiple multi-factor authentication options which you can choose from. Okay, you can use Azure multi-factor authentication standalone. You can use the Azure Active Directory Premium for implementing it. You can actually go back and ensure that you freeze the, you actually go ahead and look for administrators, and you can ensure that a subset of the Azure multi-factor functionality is included in Office 365, including the login for your Azure website, which you do. You should be able to go ahead and leverage the same multi-factor authentication. So a quick look into the flow. What happens is on-premises user tries to go ahead and request for a resource. When this request is being first, so what happens if it is an online resource and if you have ADFS implemented, the request is being sent back to on-premises STS, and on-premises STS talks to on-prem AD and gives a valid token. But the user will still not be able to sign in, because what would they see? They would actually go back and get a challenge for the two-factor authentication, and the user will either receive a text or a phone call, which we are going to try and simulate today. Okay? And once the phone call is acknowledged, then the user will be able to go back and sign in. This is true across for not only for your user experience login, but also for the apps, which means like we sign into any of the Hotmail sites or any of the Microsoft sites, or whichever site has a kind of multi-factor authentication enabled, it works the same this way. The user identity still resides in one of these locations, depending on how you have provisioned it, which is on-prem or online. Okay, and with that, let's try to look into what are the steps which are required before we do the last demo for the day. You log into tenant admin, you enable multi-factor authentication for users. You could do it using a phone, a smart card, or whatever you would want to go ahead and get with, or any device, okay, that supports multi-factor authentication. Once you enable that, you inform the users to log in. Once the user tries to log in, before the sign-in is complete, there is a verification call which happens. Once the call is acknowledged, the user sign-in is complete. And for this, all of these apps which we have on our devices, they use the same multi-factor authentication platform too. So let's try to go ahead and do that. And when I say do the demo, we will try to enable multi-factor authentication, and I will do the same struggling with my laptop. Blame it on display card.
So what we really need now is, if we want to test Manas' capability to do this, is a volunteer to give us a phone number. Who wants to get a phone call?
Okay, and
just to prove we're not cheating.
Yes, and how easy it is to configure it. Okay.
Me then.
Okay, yeah, you.
You can do mine. +358.
Give me just 1 second while I. So what we need to do this is click on setup. When I set this up, log in. Okay, it allows you to choose which user. You can do a bulk update, or you can choose one user. The user which we are going to try and see is Mr. CEO. Okay, and then I click on enable. It says enable multi-factor auth. When I do this, I'm just enabling it for one user. You could do a bulk update as well. Okay, so this gets enabled, and then it says what do you need to go ahead and do for this specific user to log in? You say manage user settings, require selected users to provide contact methods again. That means you are just enabling the user to be able to kind of sign in with their own numbers. And when I do that, I thought I was logged in with Bob Fox somewhere. Okay, here, I'll sign out. And I'm trying to log in with Bob's account. Yeah. Okay, and the password. So it says, help us protect your account. Your admin has, so we showed you 3 authentication steps. It's a 3-step authentication which it did. The first time it actually, we typed in the username, it sent a request to on-prem to get a token. And then because Bob is not within the corporate directory right now, he's traveling, so it actually, the STS endpoint challenged it for the username and password. And now it says, set up phone factor authentication. So I click on set up now. Bob, if you, sorry, Neil, if you type in the.
Oh, your phone number's not changed, Kimo.
So you choose the country or region and you provide your phone number. So this, you are enabling the user. So I'm going to say from an implementation perspective, if you ask the user saying, give me your phone number, how many users would you go ahead and ask the phone number for? So this is just the first time setting up experience. Okay, and now Neil should, okay, Kimo should receive a call. Still not? Okay, and once you receive a call, you have to acknowledge it by using the hash key on the, on the keyboard. And once he kind of goes ahead and accepts it, it should say verification complete. Please wait while we save your settings. So Kimo has pressed the hash key, and now it says, do you want an app password? Which means if Kimo has we have couple of apps and Kimo wants them on their phone, you could use that password. And the phone, it would also go ahead and do the same experience. And now let's look for Bob to sign in. So now Bob has signed in with this phone factor authentication, which means henceforth, whenever Bob tries to sign in, okay, Kimo, I'm going to say the phone should go to Kimo's phone, and if Kimo authenticates, then Bob logs in. You could, and what I tried to just show you is, that's the power of authentication, which means you could literally hire a guy who checks if the authentication is coming in, and if you choose and allow the user to log in or you do not allow the user to log in, depends on which phone number you are redirecting the user call to.
And then with Internet of Things, you can have a breath meter.
Okay, guys, so that's how you integrate, and once you do that, it just continues with that kind of security which you have. Okay, my laptop. Okay, so a quick recap. Our user decided on on-prem. We decided to go ahead and sync it using directory synchronization. Synced it to Office 365. Bob, being a CEO who wants the seamless sign-on, signs on with, and we implement ADFS. Once ADFS is done, Bob decides to go ahead and leverage the IaaS capabilities. We integrated IaaS and Office 365 users. Once that's done, we said, okay, let's host our company's website in infrastructure as a service. So we use the same set of users to authenticate. Once that was done, we said, well, good. We need one common place to manage all the users. So we integrated IaaS and Office 365. Once that was done, we decided, okay, Bob is doing too many things. Let's go ahead and redirect the phone to somebody else, and we decide whether we should allow him to log in from tomorrow or not. So we decided to go ahead and give the phone number of Kimo. So if Kimo thinks Bob should log in, then he logs in. If not, then he doesn't log in. Guys, that's what we wanted to go ahead and talk about. If there are more questions, we can discuss.